You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back to the show, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with Tom O'Neill, who is the president and CEO of Cognivue. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Dr. Roxy. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me.
It is so good to have you here. And, I have a lot of really interesting guest entrepreneurs on the show that are doing some really revolutionary things. But like we were talking about earlier, this is definitely one of those top game changers that I think affects everyone, whether they're in healthcare or not. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, I love telling our story, and I love telling you about the mission we have, because I do think we're working hard to help change the landscape in the world as it relates to mild cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about your background and
Yep.
what you've been innovating these days.
Yeah, so my name's Tom O'Neill, and I have been in healthcare for 30 years, all on the commercial side, on the manufacturer supplier side. But I've worked with many specialties, everything from vision care, pharmaceuticals, to molecular diagnostics, chemistry, immunohematology, and life sciences. But I've been here at Cognivue for 5.5 years, really focused on the neurology space and really within neurology, the mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's. And our mission that I just kind of referenced before is about giving providers and health systems and ultimately their patients a way to test or identify potential challenges or issues around brain health before it becomes something permanent like dementia, Alzheimer's, when there's not a lot that can be done about it. So really excited about making a difference in this space.
So how did you get involved in Cognivue, and why is this a passion or mission of yours?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. I was at a company called QIAGEN. So I ran their North America molecular diagnostics, life sciences, and bioinformatics business. And before I came here, and the owner of the primary investor and owner of Cognivue, his name's Tom Golisano. Tom is the founder of a company called Paychex. He's a big philanthropist. Tom's worth billions, and he acquired this business and brought me in to run it. And what he tells us all the time, and I really believe this is an opportunity for us to do well in business while doing good for others. And so for me, being in healthcare for 30 years, it's always been about the patient. Even when I was back with Johnson & Johnson, it's kind of where I kind of cut my teeth in healthcare, and we lived by our credo. Right. The credo, the J&J credo, was what we live by. And it does talk about not only the shareholders for sure, but more the providers and the patients. And that's where I think I got to bring my 30 years of experience kind of all together to focus on Cognivue and on the cognitive space. And I really don't talk to a lot of people that haven't been impacted by whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or TBI or concussion, the spaces we work in. So it really does hit home personally with many, many people.
And the name of my company is Legacy DNA, and the legacy piece is exactly what you're talking about. Every innovator in healthcare has an opportunity to leave a really substantial legacy in the work that you're doing. So that's really exciting. So let's talk about why brain health, and why what you're doing is so important or needed in the marketplace. Why isn't it already being done?
Yeah. So it's really a great question. And it's one we've been wrestling with for 5.5 years since I came here. I do think in healthcare, we take care of everything we test and treat everything within the human body except the brain. So I think because I think healthcare has gotten so good, we're outliving our brains.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge, right? So if you want to get really into kind of very tactically what's happening is, you would think that cognitive testing or brain health screening would happen in the primary care, internal medicine, family practice, in those clinics.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen as much, and it doesn't happen as much as it should, for not because they're not great doctors, they're amazing doctors, but there's three real reasons. The first is um, they're seeing 30 to 40 patients a day, and they don't necessarily have the time to get into a deeper brain health conversation or screening with those patients. And if they do, the payers, right, sometimes make it a challenge for them to get reimbursed for it. And then the third reason, until recently, there wasn't a prescription they could write. There wasn't an intervention. Their intervention was the modifiable risk factors like diet, exercise, lifestyle, mindfulness, hearing, vision, those things. And if you talk to doctors, they're like, I already counsel my patients to eat right and exercise. And I always say,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that perspective, doctor, but now you have an inflection point. You have a FDA cleared technology and a report that will be an inflection point for that patient. Think about it this way, Dr. Roxy, is I didn't start taking my Lipitor and I didn't start really watching what I was eating until I saw what my cholesterol numbers were.
Mhm.
So do you think maybe the screening, the assessment that we do in the doctor's office and that report might get some people to go, oh my gosh, there's something I need to do about this. What can I do?
Yeah.
Diet, exercise, lifestyle, the other things really start to make a difference. So I think with our technology, we're self-administered, self-scored. It doesn't take a doctor to administer it, but it has to be done in that clinicians or the doctor's office. So those are the things that I think have kept it from becoming mainstream.
Yeah.
I think in the very near future, with your listeners might have heard, or they may know that Leqembi, which is a pharmaceutical company named Eisai, Leqembi got recently approved for mild cognitive impairment and for early Alzheimer's. Now,
Mhm.
Leqembi is not going to cure Alzheimer's, but what it does do is it removes what's called amyloid plaque, as much of it as possible from the brain, which then delays the onset of Alzheimer's. So it delays it, call it 5 to 6 months, which is important, right? When you're diagnosed, or if you're in that phase, 5 or 6 months is a long time. So because of that, and there's Eli Lilly is expected to have their drug approved in December, and
Okay.
there are 12 other drugs after them that are expected, that are in phase 3 trials right now, that are expected to hit the market in the next 4 years. The reason why I say that is it's gonna the health systems, everything from the policymakers to the payers to the providers, everybody's going to deal now with the I think the onslaught of patients that are
Mhm.
going to be coming to the market that want to get access to these medications. And right now, I don't think we're set up for that. I don't think our payers or our health systems or our providers are ready for it. So it's going to be a shock to the system, if you will. But I think we bring a great tool that'll allow them to get patients through at least the initial screening quickly and without as much of an effort from their staff. So you're not taking time away from what they do every day.
Sure. So you mentioned payers a couple of times. Have you fleshed out what is that reimbursement pathway
Yeah,
for?
there is. So a couple of things. So with the new drug that got approved, CMS, who decides the Medicare reimbursement, has chosen to reimburse for Eisai's drug Leqembi. That's great news.
Yep. Yep.
But for normal cognitive testing outside of that drug, it really is a payer by payer decision.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, there are codes being what a doctor would put through. And there's really no challenge for a neurologist or a neuropsych or a psych to submit for reimbursement to a commercial payer for those for the process of screening a patient or doing a cognitive assessment. But for primary care, it really becomes dependent on the commercial payer. So there's some places like in Michigan, we don't have an issue. Other challenges, like here in upstate New York, we do have some challenges. Um, So yeah, there is a pathway.
Yeah,
That pathway is primarily meant for the specialist, and there are codes, and sometimes the commercial payers make it a little bit more difficult for a primary care internal medicine doctor to process those. I
sure.
think that's going to have to go away, because I think with the millions of patients that are going to want to have access to these new medications, they're going to have to open up that process.
Some
Yeah,
kind of tool, right? Some kind of assessment tool.
yeah,
So, I describe the commercialization journey in healthcare as a long, hard slog.
yeah,
And you've been doing this for a couple days now, right?
yeah,
So I want to kind of unpack your commercialization journey,
yep,
kind of rewinding a little bit to those early days, and kind of then just walking us through this somewhat chronologically, because you've been doing this since 2017, 2018.
yep. 2018. Yep.
2018, yep. And so for the last 5 years, let's go back to the early days of, establishing the clinical evidence, just the whole FDA
Yeah.
approval journey. What are some of those hurdles that you had to overcome
Yep.
that our listeners might be able to learn from?
Yeah. So great question. So I'll take it back to when I started in 2018. Our owner, our primary investor, Tom Golisano, who had acquired the technology, um, uh, from a gentleman named Dr. Duffy. Dr. Duffy, brilliant neurologist and neuroscientist,
Okay.
had already carried it through the FDA de novo process. So there was no predicate before us. It was all the old paper and pencil, the MOCA, MMSE, those slums. Those are the paper and pencil tests that have been around for 30 or 40 years. Well, Dr. Duffy and he had taken it through that de novo process and got FDA clearance for the technology. As soon after that, I think the angel investors that were involved in it, they ran out of funding, and that's when Tom came in and acquired it and brought me in. Now, here's where I'll say that was there. The challenges there that we inherited right away was it was a very large device, and the way I explained it, it was think of it like a 1985 microfiche machine. It was 130 pounds. It was very large. You had to plug it in. It was very difficult to kind of think about commercializing that device.
Yeah.
In addition to, while they had FDA clearance, there was no peer reviewed journal articles, right? So that while the FDA clearance is a foot in the door, that is kind of step one.
Yeah.
Doctors want to see peer reviewed articles, right, that validate the technology. So we kind of spent the first couple of years um, reducing the size of the device. Yeah, I have one around my right corner here. So now it's portable, right?
Yeah.
It has a battery that stays charged for the full day. So a doctor's office can move it from exam room to exam room. We really spent a lot of time re-engineering let's say the box. The technology, the algorithm is still the amazing algorithm that Dr. Duffy built, but we improved the overall design and portability of the device.
Sure.
At the same time, we took the FDA data and then started putting it into peer-reviewed journal articles. In addition to, that's one step, right? But you got to go deeper on clinical validation. So we spent a number of years and a few $1 million running large clinical studies. We did the BioHermes studies, a BioHermes study with the Global Alzheimer's Platform. That's 1,000 patients. 20% were going to be diverse. And to oversimplify it, it was every patient got Cognivue, an MMSE, the paper and pencil test, a C2N blood biomarker for the looking for the plaque, a PET scan, and a few more hours of neuropsych workup. So that was 1,000 patients, right? That we just closed in last November. We did another 1,600 patient study comparing Cognivue to our bands. Our bands is a deeper cognitive assessment.
Okay.
So we did that, spent the time to get that data. That's data that we're now analyzing, but also have gotten into 4 different posters at different conferences.
Yep.
And that'll translate then to peer-reviewed articles in 2024, part of Davos. And there's 12 other studies. I don't want to get into all of them, but there's 12 other studies. So that clinical validation for a doctor is really critical. So not only for us, but to make sure that that doctor understands when they bring our technology into their clinic, that it's clinically validated, right?
Yep.
So that we spent a lot of time in those. Here's what I say: the first 2 years building the device, getting some basic clinical validation data, and then we launched the new portable device in March of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Great timing, right? Yeah, it just clicked, right? So
Yeah.
we launched it right when COVID hit. COVID shut
Perfect timing to
perfect,
launch something new.
perfect, perfect timing. So COVID closed everything,
Yeah.
except there was a period of about 3 months where all of audiology and optometry actually were closed by the federal government. So they closed their offices, right, for 2 or 3 months.
Yep.
We knew that there's clinical data that showed a very clear connection within audiology. As an example, you hear with your ears, but you process those sounds with your brain, right?
Mm.
If there's a hearing is the most modifiable risk factor to cognitive issues
Mm-hmm.
or early dementia, right? So we pivoted and started doing Zoom, which was new at the time. We started doing Zoom and conference calls with hundreds of audiologists would get on the call. So we shifted our business model through COVID, and we started talking to audiologists, to some optometrists, and also to pharmacy. And we knew we couldn't get into the MD's office or to hospitals, but we could get into those clinicians' offices. And that's really where we shifted. And one thing I should back up and say is when we launched in March of 2020, one of the things that we realized, and this probably comes more from my experience, having been across many sectors in healthcare, is I knew there's no way that it was just going to have to sit with the MDs, the primary care and internal medicine and neurology docs. I
Yeah.
mean, neurology is an example. You're going to be waiting 4 to 6 months to see a neurologist in most parts of the country.
Sure.
Well, so we broadened the screening class by putting a 5-minute screening. So we have a 5-minute Cognivue Thrive, which is more of a screening, and that's for the optometrist, the audiologist, and the pharmacist, right? The non-MD, but clinicians that serve patients.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the Cognivue Clarity, which is the MD version, and that's for everything from internal medicine, family practice to neurology, neuropsych, psych. So when we tried to expand the screening class of clinicians, thankfully we did that, right? Because the MD space was closed really for a couple of years. And then we shifted to the audiologists and pharmacists primarily. That kind of gets us to where we are, where we're now re-engaging in a much bigger way with the MDs and with the health systems.
Yeah.
I think that's where the market's going to open up pretty significantly.
So what was it like, when I'm talking to and working with health innovators? I think when I hear your story, one of the things that innovators or leaders like yourself struggle with is being able to take the time for doing that discovery work and being able to build out that clinical evidence and validation while you're not necessarily generating revenue.
Yep.
And still be able to keep the lights on and raise money or keep the money flowing from other sources until you get to cash flow, and finding the right investors that are going to see that vision as well. So that way there isn't that constant tension and rub with trying to put the cart before the horse, really being able to make money before you actually have those assets that are critical to that commercial success.
Yeah, you said it phenomenally well. Like that is the challenge of any startup, but in healthcare in particular, because
Mhm.
healthcare takes longer and costs more.
Yep.
Um, and so what I would say, because I have not only myself, but a lot of friends who are in this world where they're in startups, whether it's venture backed startups, family office backed startups, or private equity backed startups in healthcare. And the key to that is, and I'll use my own experience, but with any of them is finding the VCs, the family offices, or the private equity that really understand the level of commitment
Yeah.
it takes in time and money to get there. Because I think most non-healthcare focused VCs or private equity or family offices immediately think commercial being how do you drive the commercial business to drive revenue to cover your costs and then become profitable. That is a challenge in healthcare because it takes time. It's an even bigger challenge for us because we're bringing a clinical service to market that's never been done before,
Yep.
right? So you're trying to change behavior, which does take longer.
Yeah.
Thankfully for me, with Tom Golisano and Grand Oaks Capital, um, Tom is a serial entrepreneur. He really understands what it takes. It's not, that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean he's easier, that he doesn't hold us accountable, but he really does understand that it does take time and it does take significant investment to get there. The other piece to that is that clinical validation that you talk about, right? There's that doesn't bring necessarily, that's not a direct line to revenue, but it's a critical component to the success of the business. Because you can have the greatest technology, healthcare technology, but if you don't have clinical data to support it, it is going to go nowhere because that is one of the first questions the doctor or the health system is going to ask about. So
As
I
they
think
should, right?
yeah. So I think you have to find
Mhm.
VCs, private equity, or family offices that really have a understanding of healthcare. I also think in this market today, after SVB, after SVB closed, and you started hearing more about the recession, what happened with those banks closing like SVB, the VCs and the private equity started focusing more on their current portfolio and less on bringing new
Sure.
investments in. So that made it even more challenging, even just to get money from your current investor,
Yeah.
let alone going and trying to find new ones. It is definitely a challenge. Less for me because I have one primary investor, and that allows me to run the business and build
Yeah.
the business where a lot of the startups you'll be talking to their founder and they're spending 75-80% of their time looking for the next investor because they have to make payroll.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's a
Right.
that's a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about this pivot to audiologist in
Mhm.
2020, kind of on the cusp of the pandemic. Was that a hard decision for you? I know that there are a lot of opportunities as you're in that early phases of being able to pivot, whether it's pivot
Right.
your target market, your go-to-market strategy, your pricing strategy, all of those different things. What was it like? Is that the only pivot that you made? And what was it like being able to wrestle with those decisions
Yeah.
of do we go this way or that way?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
The way I always describe it for a startup, focus is really important, and scope of your business is really important, and it's really easy to chase all the shiny objects, right? Like, oh my gosh, this looks like an opportunity. Let's go chase that. Oh my gosh, let's go chase that. The challenge with it is you have limited resources, right? So
Uh-huh.
it's not
Yep.
Johnson and Johnson, right? You're a small startup. So you have to focus your attention. So the way I think about it, and I'll answer your question on audiology in particular, but the way I think about it is we put a lot of think about it fishing. We put a lot of lines in different ponds
Yep.
just to see where there might be opportunities, but we really try to keep our focus. And when we pivoted to audiology, we had actually started investigating audiology clinically 6 months before that. Um,
Okay.
we
Yep.
had actually started at the 6 months before that, also building a business that was scalable by being remote. Because you can't put 100 reps in the field. We don't have that kind of
Yeah.
ability to do that. So we had started working on remote, and we had started working on audiology 6 months before anybody had even heard of the word or the acronym COVID. So we were kind of ready to pivot. It just forced us to do that pivot maybe a little bit quicker. Um, so for us, it was I want to say natural, but it was a natural part of how, remember, I launched. We just had really the 10-minute assessment clarity before.
Yeah.
Here we launched Thrive, so Cognivue Thrive. So this gave us the opportunity to go after that market very
Hmm.
specifically as a screening class
Yeah.
to help audiologists have bigger, deeper clinical conversations with their patients than just hearing.
Yeah.
Because we know by all of our friends who are audiologists and our advisors that it takes about 7 years for a patient to actually go get hearing aids. And then even when they go in to get them, many times they walk away without them. But when you make it a bigger conversation that it's about your hearing, but look at what's also potentially being
Yeah.
affected,
Uh-huh.
which is the processing of that sound. And so, yeah, it was a relatively easy shift for us. But it is, to your point, you got to be careful. You got to be focused.
So if it takes 7 years to get them to buy them, I wonder how many years it takes them to actually wear them every day.
I think that's a whole other
Hopefully
question.
a lot more than 7 years.
I think it also depends on your husband or wife that's maybe,
Right, right, right,
on
exactly.
yeah,
When
yeah,
you're wanting to tune out. Yeah,
right.
I betcha. Uh, okay. So you've got the FDA clearance, you've got the funding, you've got the clinical evidence, the validation, and
Yep,
peer-reviewed studies. So what are some of the other hurdles that you had to overcome?
yep. Yeah, so listen, there seems to be hurdles every day in a startup. I would
Yeah.
say, I don't say that lightly. I think everybody that's in a startup understands, like, it's almost like every month, every week, every couple weeks, there's something that just could completely derail the business or the company. And that's what our jobs are as leaders in innovative companies and bringing innovation to market. And I just mentioned a few to you when I talk about the first couple of years building a reliable, viable device that's portable,
Yeah.
building the clinical validation.
Yeah.
Then everybody that has been in startup for the last 4 or 5 years went through COVID. So COVID was a massive change, right? And not only was it a massive change within healthcare and within the market itself, but it changed how people um, communicate. It changes how people listen and learn. It changes how people operate, right? So it changed
Yeah.
everything across, and it's gonna for years to come. So I
Hmm.
think those are things that were always a challenge. But I'm going to get tactical for some. But like a month ago, our air conditioner went. Well, because our air conditioner went in our office, we have our own manufacturing. We do our own manufacturing in the back. We have our offices in the front, but the air conditioner went down. And you think of that as, well, okay, call somebody. Well, do you know how difficult it is now post COVID to get, because every supply chain's challenged, so we couldn't get the parts.
Yeah.
Every company has issues with labor, so you don't have a lot of. So I just use that as a really small example, but it's the example that says, listen, something like that for a big company is not a big deal. For us, it becomes a challenge, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are things that we deal with every single day that bigger companies probably just don't really think much about. When our electricity goes out, which it did because of we got hot here in Rochester, New York, which it doesn't get very
Right.
often.
Right.
But
Yeah.
this whole corporate area we're in lost electricity for
Mm.
half a day. We had to send everybody home.
Mm.
But the good news of that is everybody's used to working remotely, so we were able to still keep going. So
Sure.
I know
Yeah.
they're probably pretty tactical examples, but we talked about the big ones. Those end up becoming some of the more challenges. The last thing I'd say is, when you're a small company, we're 40 plus people. When you're a small company, every individual is important, right? Like critically important. So if you lose those are all critical employees. If you lose
Yeah.
one, that causes you challenges. Where when I was running a $1 billion business with 700 people, yes, everybody's important always, but you probably have less of the feel of the impact versus when you're 40 people and everybody plays that kind
Yeah.
of role.
Well, that was going to be my next question is, for you personally as a leader, how has that been different for you? I've, worked with a number of different executives from different large behemoth, whether it's
Yeah.
pharma or med device, that have moved into this world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And it's been like, whoa,
Yeah.
I don't have a team behind me to do that.
Yeah.
I have to do that myself. And so, what were some of the things that you experienced as you kind of transitioned into this more entrepreneurial world?
Yeah. So first off, it wasn't my first time. So
Yeah.
I was the number 6 person at a technology vision technology company called Synergize. It's
Yep.
a hybrid contact lens company. I was based in Carlsbad, California, and I was building out a sales organization. So everything from the comp models to the territory alignments to the targeting to everything that comes with a sales
Yep.
organization. And I would talk to people and they'd always say, okay, so what do you do every day? And I go, well, and I'd say it half joking. I'd say, well, when I'm done building out a sales organization, I'm cleaning the bathrooms.
Right.
And they'd
Right.
laugh and I'd be like, no, really, that's what I'm doing. What I learned from Synergize I've carried it through to here is I think there are big company people,
Yep.
and then I think there are startup people. And I think I can live in both relatively well. And I don't mean that egotistically. I mean, I can do that really well because I don't have that ego that says, hey, I can't go around and clean out the garbage in every
Right.
office, or I can't
Yep.
go out and clean the windows, or I can't go out and call on customers. I'm actually comfortable doing all of those things as well as running the business. So to
Hmm.
me, that that becomes less about my ability because I know I'm comfortable in both places. But when I'm hiring people, and if some of their first questions are, well, what does my finance team look like, or what does my clinical team look like? I hold up a mirror and I go, here's your team.
Right.
It's you, and you got to get
And
them
now
comfortable.
it's you.
Now it's you, and
Yeah.
so they need to understand like that's something that
Yeah.
is real, and it's not just words. It's like who do I call to set up my travel? Well, you call Delta,
Right.
you,
Right. Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think for me, I'm really comfortable with that. I think if if somebody's going from a big corporation into a small startup, I think they really have to wrap their head around that because it does become your decisions are bigger. You have less data to make those decisions. So you got to really use your gut and the data you have and your experience.
Yeah.
You also have less support. So you have to get people that are on your team that are willing to roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. And everybody's got to be focused on the mission, right?
Yep.
Because even in small organizations, you can lose the message because everybody's running 100 miles an hour and everybody's almost a utility player. So they're playing multiple roles. I think it's making sure that everybody's accountable and clear to what they have to do and how that then translates to performance of the organization.
And flexibility and nimbleness because there's constant change, right? In a larger organization, it might be steady as we go. We might be strategically planning what we're going to do in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we're talking about what we're going to do next week, and it's probably going to be different than what we're doing the following week.
Hey, Dr. Roxy, you couldn't be more right on. And so it does spark a thought in my head is we call them all calls. So we do regular all calls with the
Yeah.
entire organization so that we're constantly communicating, constantly telling people what we're doing, how we're doing it, what's working, what's not. My team will say, hey, we love your direct approach. And I always laugh. I go, you like it when it's good news. You're not gonna like it when it's bad news, but you're always going to know where I stand. I don't really, we're all business people. We're all adults. We're here for a reason. And sometimes that's going to be a tough message. But it's also going to be good stuff. But that comes with, in fact, I just got a book I was recommended, Radical Candor.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So I'm going to read that this weekend, but I think it is the more direct you can be it actually is a gift to everybody versus trying to dance around and be political around things. I'm not smart enough to be political. I don't want to, I don't have the time to do that or
Right,
the
right,
patience.
yeah.
So I
Uh,
just kind of say it the way it is.
sure, sure. So, often when we hear these success stories, whether
Mhm.
it's in healthcare or in other industries, we tend to think, oh, that person just got lucky.
Mhm.
And, I think a lot of times when we peel back the layers of that, it's usually around timing, that there's something that's happening in the timing, the market trends, that is creating that sweet spot. And for you've got a number of trends that are converging into this really incredible catalyst moment
Yep.
for you. Let's talk about that a little bit, and how you think that that's going to accelerate your growth
Yeah.
in the near and long term future.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think of it as a three-legged stool, right? There are three big things happening. The first is the market. Within the market, I mentioned Eisai's, the pharmaceutical company Eisai's drug,
Yep.
Leqembi, getting approved as the first fully FDA approved drug for for mild cognitive impairment, early Alzheimer's. That just, and then other big thing that happened is CMS chose to cover that drug. It's a very expensive drug. A couple of things. It's $26,000, $26,500 a year for that drug. The treatment's between 12 and 18 months. Um, there are some pretty significant side effects from brain bleeds to brain swelling. So when the drug it's not a pill, it's infused. So when it's infused, after it's infused, that patient is going to have to be monitored through that period. Because it's so expensive and because there are some significant side effects, that means that, and CMS did this, they put what's called a registry, but for lack of a better explanation, think of it this way. It's a prior authorization, or kind of think of it as a screening process, right? For the non-physicians on your call, where the patients are going to have to go, because they're going to want to make sure they pick the right patients for
Yep.
the medication.
Hmm.
So it might be Cognivue. Actually, I'll take a step back. It might be AI. So we're working with a really a great company called Digicare Realized as a partner of ours that does the AI. So scans all the patient data files through the EMR, and then
Yep.
identifies those patients that then should get a Cognivue screening. And then you're probably going to get a blood biomarker test, and then a PET scan, and maybe some other neuropsych workup, because it's so expensive and because of the side effect profile. So that by itself is going to increase the need for cognitive screening to become a normal part of, and you've heard me mention of the fifth vital sign. I
Yep.
think it's got to become the fifth vital sign within a regular primary care doctor office call, because that's going to be one of the first steps.
Sure.
In addition to that, within the market, Eisai, Lilly, which is next expected to have their drug approved sometime in the fourth quarter in December. When these pharmaceutical companies turn on their direct consumer education and advertising,
Mhm.
it's going to raise the level of awareness, where this is where the flood of patients will start to ask their doctors about, how do I get access? And it's maybe because they feel they may have an issue, or they may be what we call the worried well. They've seen mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, somebody with dementia, Alzheimer's. So they're already thinking they may have it, even if they have no signs. So I
Yeah.
think that's what's happening within the market. The second leg of this is that we have clinical data that's all hitting the market right now, from the BioHermes study, the focus study I mentioned, Davos, and some other ones we're on. So that's hitting the market at the same time, which is further clinical validation, but also improves our sensitivity and specificity of our technology. And the third leg of that stool is we're launching a brand new device with improved sensitivity, specificity, reporting, and functionality, and we're launching that here in 2024. So for us, those are all coming together almost kind of fortuitously, right at the right
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
very exciting about those things happening. But like you said in the beginning, it's 6 years in the making, right? This didn't just happen over. And actually, if you go back to the FDA clearance, it's almost 19, 20 years in the making.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going back to the long, hard slog.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh, so Tom, this has been such an incredible conversation. Is there anything else that you would want to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
No, I think the only thing I'd say is it's great that I get to tell you the story, but it's the 40 plus people that are on my team that really make a difference. I get to tell the story. I get to be the face of this and the conversation around it, but it really is about the team that I have, and they're amazing. And so I just want to make sure I call that out.
Awesome. So how do folks get a hold of you if anybody wants to follow up with you at the end of the show?
Absolutely. So go to our website, which is www.cognivue, COGNIVUE.com. And there's all kinds of information on the website. There's also a place to ask if you want to do you want to have a pilot, or not a pilot, if you want to do a trial of our technology. Again, whether you're a pharmacist, optometrist, audiologist, or if you're an MD of any type, we will not only get you the device, but we have people to install, in service, train, and get you and your staff up and running.
Awesome. Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. And for our listeners, if you haven't subscribed to the show, please do so. And I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.